Long, long ago, the Kabul River in Syria was the heart of a peculiar culture, the Hurrians. These people spoke an isolated family of languages called Hurro-Artian, and their history dates as back as hundreds of years before the Mitanni Empire, who conquered them in 2250 BC, after which they learned to write, well, carve, in the cuneiform style. After passing through the hands of the Neo-Sumerian Empire, it was in the 18th century BC, when the rule of Changchi-Adad ended with his death, that many of them migrated towards Anatolia, getting away from the many conflicts that happened because of his passing. So yeah, they composed a significant part of the Eastern Hittite domain, and the ones who remained in Hurrian lands gave the Hittites a lot of trouble, raiding and sacking their cities for the following centuries. The Hurrians are, as a matter of fact, responsible for the oldest song or musical piece ever found, which is called Hurrian Hymn 6 or Hymn to Nikal, which is the name of the Hurrian goddess of the moon, and is the song that you're hearing in the background right now. One of the many interpretations of the song is the one that you hear in many Bronze Age memes. From 1600 BC, they will make a confederation to strengthen their defenses, and it will be named after the ruling dynasty. It was the kingdom of the Mitanni, with the city of Washukani as the capital. The most confusing part about the Mitanni kings is that their names were Indo-European in origin, specifically Indo-Iranian. Names like Chutarna, Baratarna, and some others you'll see later, as well as the capital Washukani, are widely accepted to be Indo-European words, and we know that they even adored Vedic deities such as Mitra, Varuna, and Indra. Yes, Indra, I'm serious. These were found in a couple of tablets from Hattusa, which were treaties between the kings of the Hittites and the Mitanni, and the original name for the kingdom itself, Mitanni, is believed to stem from Hurrian and Indo-Aryan, meaning United Kingdom. Wait, what are the Brits doing here? Well, I'm not surprised that the second most common country of origin for the stuff at the British Museum is Iraq. They've been collecting stuff there since the Middle Bronze Age. Anyway, although most of the population spoke the Hurrian tongue, there are many words from the cuneiform carvings of the monarchs and the warrior caste that are very similar to Sanskrit, the ancient Indian from the Vedic era, but the most likely case is that both the Mitanni and the Sanskrit languages descend from the Indo-European populations from the very unknown Oxus civilization, also called Bactria-Margiana Complex, or BMAC, from the Afghan plateau. And yes, they were a civilization with a writing system that is actually reminiscent of the Indus Valley one, funnily enough. And the Oxus civilization are the ones responsible for the Indo-European influence on Rigvedic India. In 1595 BC, after the great Hittite king Murchili sieged and sacked the mighty city of Babylon, the ones who took the throne of the Babylonian Empire were the so-called Kassites, who will go on to have some border conflicts with the Mitanni for the following centuries. By the beginning of the 15th century BC, the Mitanni had conquered ex-Hittite territories to the west, like the city of Carchemish, obtaining access to the Mediterranean trade, and also in North Mesopotamia in the east, in what is today North Iraq, acquiring the lands surrounding Assyria and making the latter into a vassal state. Owning vast lands and ruling over multiple cultural groups, they have become an empire, one surrounded by the warring state of the Hittites in the northwest, the powerful Egyptians in the south, and the legacy of Sumeria and Akkad as the Kassite Babylon in the southeast, the three of which were empires and the greatest superpowers of civilized humankind at the time, but the Mitanni seemingly didn't give a damn. By this time, the new kingdom of Egypt or Kemet, was very keen in strengthening their empire, so the new pharaoh, Thutmose I, was acquiring territories in the Levant, nearing the borders of a new Bronze Age civilization. The army of the Mitanni was developing with intent. They are actually the original creators of the spoke-wheeled chariot, a technology that seems to be a consequence of their Indo-European heritage, and were some of the first to invent the scale or lamella armor alongside Egypt, being of a beautiful golden color in their case. Their word for scale mail was Shariana, which would later on inspire the names of Susharma in all other Bronze Age armies. However, things changed a little bit for our boys when the pharaoh Thutmose III took full control of Kemet in 1450 BC. This remarkable conqueror started with the Battle of Megiddo in the Levant in 1457 BC, in which he defeated the Canaanite leader of Kadesh and his Mitanni allies by routing them with his chariots, in what became the oldest battle ever recorded, in the sense that most of the details are widely accepted today as accurate. These threatened the prosperity of the Mitanni, but in the 1420s BC, Shaushtata ascended to their throne. After consolidating his defenses and vassal states, he chose to not open conflict with Egypt, but rather start a sort of Cold War against them by sending some monetary aid to their rebellions in Egypt and the Levant, and only trading with higher taxes than normal. Basically a Bronze Age version of the Trump-China tariff mess. However, Assyria, who was a subject of the Mitanni, decided to support Egypt. Shaushtata didn't like that and invaded them, starting with the siege of Ashur, raiding the city, sacking it, and bringing back many treasures to Wachukani. His following campaigns will be to take the territories of Alalak in Syria and Kishuwana in southeastern Anatolia. I forgot to tidy the chessboard. After this, the Mesopotamian and Levant flanks of the empire were consolidated and weren't going to move anytime soon, so they could focus their efforts in facing their Indo-European cousins, the Hittites. Shaushtata had become the greatest emperor the Mitanni ever had, but after his surprising death in 1400 BC, his son Artatama I took the throne. He had both the pressure of living up to the expectations that his father had left and the risk of a war on two fronts, against the Hittites and the Egyptians. And if you were to ask the Germans, who've done that twice in a row, they'll say it's probably not a good idea. His solution, however, was to try to raise the friendliness points with Egypt like he was playing Total War. He offered the current pharaoh, Amenhotep II, to split the contested lands in Syria in a way that seemed very generous towards the Egyptians. The pharaoh suspected it could be foul play, so he didn't answer, which is fair because they were killing each other in the previous reigns anyway. But his son Thutmose IV proposed a marriage between him and one of Artatama's daughters, but the king of the Mitanni refused and offered an alternative. Thing is that the pharaoh did 7 consecutive marriage proposals with offers that go higher and higher until the Mitanni finally accepted. It is believed that the daughter in question will be the later Egyptian queen Mutemwija, which will make Artatama I into the maternal grandfather of the following pharaoh, Amenhotep III, and the latter into a half-breed of Egyptian and Indo-Aryan blood. Are you confused already? No? I'll keep going. Another piece of the puzzle is that the Marianu were a caste of chariot warriors mentioned before the rise of the Mitanni kingdom, and who are related to the Hyksos invasion of Egypt from 1650 BC. Thing is that all of the Marianu names that we found are Semitic in origin, making scholars assume that the Marianu were just Middle Eastern. But since they later became the warrior nobility of the Indo-European Mitanni, increases the possibility that both the Mariano and the Hyksos could be Indo-Aryan up to a certain extent. And since the mummies of Amenhotep III and all of his descendants, yes, including Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, have the R1b haplogroup, which is basically a gene that's very common within Indo-European people. It is also very common within some people of Central Africa. Anyway, this is one of the arguments used to try to prove that Egypt, as in Egyptian civilization and empire, very important for human history, was Indo-European rather than a mix of African, North African and Semitic like the rest of the evidence proves. But this R1b haplogroup is probably just a consequence of immigration and Artatama I randomly becoming the grandpa of the royal pharaoh bloodline because he was playing a politics game. Also, what point is it there in trying to prove that the common Egyptians were Indo-European, basing it on the royals? Just because Nicholas II was extremely German and Dutch, it does not mean that the Russians were Germans. Do you get me? Anyway, Thutmose IV and Artatama shared some quality time together, became best friends forever, and even called each other beloved brother in letters. Artatama finished his reign around 1380 BC, being followed by Shutarna II, who defended the Mitanni Empire against the Hittite invasion, which was actually easy, because the Egyptians were there too. He was really good pals with his probably nephew, Pharaoh Amenhotep III, and even married him to his daughter Gilukepa. This will make their children even more Indo-European. I don't know why, but I found that hilarious. Although the names of the children of Gilukepa are unknown. Then the Mitanni family will go on to have a phase of inner conflicts and assassinations, ending up with Tushratta as the king of the Mitanni and Artatama II as a rebel ruler. Tushratta fought against the great Hittite king Shupiluluma I, but the latter made good use of the situation and recognized the rebel ruler Artatama as the legitimate monarch of his people, supporting him against Tushratta. Unfortunately for the Mitanni, the political unrest made it quite easy for Shupiluluma to reach the capital Washukani, who ended up sacking it in 1340 BC. Tushratta managed to escape the siege, but was assassinated by one of his own children. The weakening of the empire was the perfect opportunity for Assyria to finally get their independence and attack the closest cities of the Mitanni while their defenses were still weak. The Hittite ruler didn't break his promise, so he remained in peace with the Mitanni one. The thing is that Artatama II chose to have good relationships with Assyria, even giving back all of the treasures that were stolen during the earliest sack of Ashur by Shaushtata. The Assyrians made good trade with them and used the Akkadian word Hanigalbat to refer to them. Shupiluluma, who couldn't afford to have both the Assyrian and the Mitanni making a team against the Hittites, decided to use the same trick again, because why not? So he decided to support another member of the royal family, Shatiwasa. Alright, these names are getting way too bizarre. Funnily enough, he was actually son of Tushratta, the same king that Shupiluluma had fought against like a decade prior. And to make it even weirder, he was probably the one who assassinated his own father. Since he was in the direct line of succession, a fair amount of the Mitanni and Hurrian populations supported him, so as he marched into Washukani, he didn't find that much resistance, and so became the king of the Hittites in 1330 BC. May I remind you that each time that these guys have a family issue, the domain loses more and more ground, and as Shatiwasa reigned over the kingdom, although they enjoyed peace, they didn't really have that much prosperity, and were nothing compared to the great empire of just a few decades prior, and the rest of the world just called them Hanigalbat rather than Mitanni. By 1300 BC, they had become just a vassal state of Assyria, and in the following decades one of the kings, Shatta, attempted to rebel against Assyria, but he was quickly defeated. Shatwara II took the throne after him, and around 1250 BC harvested the fantasy of a neo-empire of the Mitanni, and the hate towards the Assyrian overlords within the Hurrians and the Mitanni people, managing to organize a major rebellion, which after some time ended up with his forces being driven back to his capital. The last king of the Mitanni defended his last city against Assyria, being severely outnumbered, but after some time the gates were opened and the revolt was crushed. Shatwara II was never heard of again, as Hani-Galbat was reorganized into another province of Assyria, the same province that would later give birth to the great Ninurta the Conqueror, an Assyrian king who might have had Mitanni ancestry, and one of the protagonists of Total War Pharaoh. Washukani was never mentioned again in history, and its location remains to this day undiscovered. As a matter of fact, finding it might be one of the greatest feats of modern archaeology due to the potential amount of information that could be in that place. I forgot to say that the first ever horse training manual comes from a Mitanni rider dating to 1400 before Christ, written by Kikuli, containing the first iteration of interval training, similar to the professional eventing techniques that have been going around for the last 30 years. And may I remind you that this tablet is 3,400 years old. It also contains some Indo-European words, such as the numbers Tera, 3, Satta, 7, and Na, 9. Many words from the Mitanni and the Hurrians have been inherited by the Armenians and also by the Kurdish people, implying a very significant link between these populations. After the Bronze Age collapse of the 12th century BC, their existence was forgotten until by the end of the 19th century BC, we were able to piece together the story of how two unique cultural groups decided to make their very own empire, surrounded by seemingly incomparable superpowers, because YOLO, you only live once. First of all, I am now on Instagram, if you want to follow me there and see some interesting reels or memes that I'll soon do over there. Hope you enjoyed the video. You can support me by commenting which Bronze Age topic you'd like me to speak about, and if not, you can just comment anything, type any random letters or recite the Bible in German if you want. That's it, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always. Ciao!